My name is Sarah, and I never thought I'd find myself lying in a hospital bed struggling to breathe, staring at the sterile white ceiling as tears filled my eyes. At 32 years old, I never imagined I would end up in a coma because of my own sister, someone I had always tried to protect, always stood up for. But here I was, waking up from a car accident she caused with no one but myself to rely on. My family. They were nowhere to be found. They didn't come to the hospital, they didn't call. And when my father finally texted, it was nothing short of a cold, dismissive comment, "You should be careful." No concern, no, "How are you?" or "Do you need anything?" Just an instruction to be more careful next time, as though I somehow deserved it. I had always been the responsible one in the family, always the one they turned to when things went wrong. My younger sister Kate was always the center of attention, the one who could do no wrong in our parents' eyes. My older brother Mark was the golden child, the one who could do anything and be forgiven. But me, I was always the mediator, the reliable one, the one who had everything figured out. Growing up in a family like mine meant playing a role you didn't choose, but were expected to fulfill. I had learned early on that if I didn't take care of myself, no one else would. When Kate crashed the car, I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. She was reckless speeding and driving under the influence, and I ended up being the one who paid the price. As my body lay there bruised and broken, I thought back to all the times I had sacrificed my dreams, my happiness, and even my health for the sake of this family. I had put everyone else first, but no one ever bothered to return the favor. That's when I realized I was done. Done with being the responsible one. Done with giving everything for a family that took me for granted. This accident, this near-death experience would be the wake-up call I needed. It would be the moment I stopped letting everyone walk all over me. I wasn't going to let this slide. It was time to fight back time, to take control of my life, even if it meant standing up against my own family. My father, always the one to make everything about himself, didn't show up until days later. When he did, his first words were not to comfort me, but to criticize Kate for getting into trouble. "What were you thinking, Kate?" he asked, his voice filled with disappointment, but there was no real empathy. "No." "Are you okay, Sarah?" "No." "How are you feeling?" My heart sank as I realized how little my well-being mattered to him. Kate, of course, was crying, playing the victim just as she always did. But I saw through it. I was the one who had to pay the price, and it felt like everyone had forgotten that. My parents, wrapped up in their own lives, barely gave me a second thought. Mark, who lived across the country, didn't even bother to call. It was as if I was just a minor inconvenience to them. I could feel the rage bubbling up inside of me. This wasn't just about the accident. It was about years of being ignored, of being the invisible one in my own family. Years of being the strong one, the reliable one, the one who didn't need help. But I did need help, and they never noticed. That day, I made a promise to myself. I would never let them treat me this way again. No more would I hide my feelings to avoid causing drama. No more would I swallow my hurt to keep the peace. They would see me. They would know my pain. And I would make sure they understood that I wasn't going to be their doormat anymore. When I woke up from the coma, the last thing I expected was to feel so alone. My body ached, my throat was dry, and I could barely move. But it wasn't just my body that was broken. My heart was shattered. The family I had sacrificed so much for was nowhere to be found. And that's when I knew. I had been fooling myself all along. The love I had hoped for, the support I had craved, had never existed. It was a fantasy. This family was toxic, and I needed to break free. Growing up in our suburban house was like living in a never-ending competition, one I never stood a chance of winning. My younger sister Kate had always been the golden child in the eyes of my parents. She was the baby, the one everyone doted on. No matter what trouble she caused, they would always brush it off, telling me that she was just being young or carefree. They could never see through her facade of innocence. Kate was spoiled, and my parents made excuses for every reckless thing she did. They were always there for her, always making sure she had everything she wanted, and I was just supposed to be the one who understood. My older brother Mark had it easier too. He was the son, the one destined for greatness. He could do no wrong in their eyes either. And then there was me stuck in the middle. I was the one who was supposed to take care of everything, who could always be counted on to get things done. But no one ever saw how much it cost me. When Kate wanted a new phone, my parents went out of their way to buy her the latest model. When Mark needed a new car for college, they didn't bat an eye. But when I needed help pursuing my dream of studying art, it was like pulling teeth to get any kind of support. My scholarship to art school in New York had been the only chance I had to escape the confines of our small town. But that dream slipped away the moment my father threw his back out. My mother Sandra told me we needed me home to take care of him. "You've always been so responsible, Sarah," she said. And just like that, my dream died. I gave it up without question. I went to the local community college instead, but every day felt like I was suffocating. I told myself it was fine. Family came first, right? But deep down, I resented them for asking me to give up everything. Then came the time Kate needed money for a new wardrobe. I had saved up $10,000 over the years, dreaming of someday going back to school, but Kate convinced me to lend it to her for her new look. "I'll pay you back, Sarah." "I promise," she said with that fake wide-eyed innocence that always seemed to work on my parents. I was too soft, too willing to believe in her. The money I gave her vanished into thin air. A few months later, I asked her about it and she shrugged it off. "Oh, it didn't work out, Sarah," she said nonchalantly. My mother, of course, jumped to her defense. "Stop being petty, Sarah," she told me. "Kate didn't mean for it to happen this way. Your sister is just trying to find herself. And that was always the case, wasn't it? No one ever saw my side. No one ever cared about my sacrifices. I had worked hard for that money, and in a split second it was gone. The more I gave, the less I got in return. It wasn't just the money, it was everything. When I started dating Paul, a guy I had been seeing seriously for over a year, my family didn't make an effort to get to know him. When I had to cancel a date with him because my parents needed me to do something for them, they didn't even acknowledge the inconvenience. Paul finally broke up with me, telling me, "Your family takes advantage of you, Sarah, and you let them." He was right. I had let them, but I couldn't find the strength to fight back. The guilt trips, the passive-aggressive comments, they were all just part of the deal. If I ever tried to establish boundaries, I was met with, "You should be helping us. Your brother and sister would do the same for you." Except they never did. When I had the flu and could barely get out of bed, no one brought me soup. When my car broke down in the snow, my brother was too busy to pick me up, so I had to pay for an Uber. And when I was struggling after losing a major client at work, Kate was too busy with her yoga class to listen. I became an expert at hiding my feelings, pretending everything was fine. But inside, I was breaking. I had convinced myself I didn't need anyone, that I was fine on my own. But deep down, I was exhausted from being the one who always held it together. I was the responsible one, the one who never needed help. At least, that's what they thought. No one knew the real me, the one who cried in the car after family gatherings or lay awake at night wondering when I would get a moment to breathe. When my mother praised me for being so self-sufficient at Thanksgiving, I nearly threw a plate at the wall. I wanted to scream, "I need you. I've always needed you. But you never see me." But I kept smiling and nodding, pretending everything was okay. After all, that's what I had always done. But everything changed the day I found the lump in my throat. The lump that changed everything. It was a Tuesday night when I first noticed the lump. I had spent hours hunched over my desk working on a freelance project, and when I finally stood up to stretch, I caught my reflection in the window. The setting sun cast a strange shadow across my neck, and that's when I saw it. A small but noticeable bulge on the right side of my throat. At first, I thought it was just a swollen gland from exhaustion, but as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. It didn't hurt, but it was there, and it wouldn't go away. I kept swallowing, hoping it would disappear, but it didn't. My voice began to sound hoarse, and I found myself clearing my throat constantly during client calls. That was when I knew. Something was wrong. It wasn't just fatigue or stress. I tried to push the thought aside, telling myself it was nothing. I convinced myself it was just a minor issue, that I had been working too hard and needed rest, but deep down I knew that wasn't true. After a week of avoiding it, I finally made an appointment with my primary care doctor. I didn't tell my family. I didn't want to worry them, especially with everything going on in their lives. My mother was busy planning Kate's birthday party, and my father was caught up in one of Mark's business ventures. I didn't want to add to their burden. The doctor's office was quiet and cold, a stark contrast to the racing thoughts in my head. Dr. Carter was kind but direct. She examined the lump, pressing her fingers against it with a calm precision that somehow made me even more anxious. "How long has this been here, Sarah?" she asked, making notes in her chart. "A week, maybe longer," I said, my voice shaky. "But it's not painful. It's just there." She nodded thoughtfully before sitting down on a stool, looking at me intently. "I want to send you for an ultrasound and some blood work," she said. "We need to rule out anything serious." The word serious hung in the air between us like a weight I couldn't lift. I wanted to ask her if she was talking about cancer, but the word wouldn't come. Instead, I nodded, too afraid to say anything. I left her office that day with a mixture of relief and fear. The relief came from knowing that I was doing something about it, but the fear, that was all too real. I didn't want to face what might be coming. The following week, I went for the ultrasound. The technician was efficient, but her impassive expression told me nothing. She glided the cold wand over my neck, capturing images from different angles. I watched her face for any sign of emotion, but there was none. Afterward, she told me the doctor would call me with the results in a few days. The days dragged on as I waited for the call. I told myself it was probably nothing, but a part of me knew that wasn't true. And then the call came. It was Dr. Carter's voice on the other end, calm but firm. "Sarah, I need you to come in tomorrow to discuss your results," she said. "Is tomorrow morning good for you?" I knew what that meant. Doctors don't call unless something's wrong. I barely slept that night, my mind racing with all the worst-case scenarios. What if it was cancer? What if I was going to die? The next morning, I arrived at Dr. Carter's office, my stomach in knots. She greeted me with a kind smile, but I could see the concern in her eyes. She showed me the ultrasound images and explained that there was a 4-centimeter nodule on my thyroid, and the blood work indicated some thyroid dysfunction. "We need to do a biopsy to determine whether it's cancer," she said, her voice gentle but serious. I was too stunned to respond. I just nodded, barely able to process what she was saying. Cancer. The word was real now. I had to face it. The next week, I went in for the biopsy. The procedure wasn't as bad as I had expected, but the feeling of vulnerability was overwhelming. They inserted a needle into my neck, and I had to lie still while they extracted cells for examination. It wasn't particularly painful, but the discomfort and the sense of powerlessness hit me harder than I anticipated. I couldn't help but feel like I was just a patient, a nameless face in a sea of medical charts and procedures. Afterward, I sat in my car trying to calm myself. I had no one to turn to, no one to comfort me. I couldn't even bring myself to tell my family. They were busy with their lives, and I didn't want to burden them with my fears. 3 days later, I received the call. Dr. Carter's voice was calm but firm as she delivered the news. "The biopsy results are in Sarah. I'm afraid it's papillary thyroid carcinoma. It's a form of thyroid cancer." I felt like the ground had been ripped out from beneath me. I couldn't breathe. I had cancer. The words were so final, and so cold. I had cancer. I was alone. I didn't know what to say. Dr. Carter continued explaining that it was highly treatable, especially when caught early, but all I could think about was the word cancer echoing in my mind. I was going to have surgery. I was going to lose part of my thyroid. But more than that, I was going to lose everything I had fought so hard to keep together. My world had crumbled in an instant, and all I could do was sit there numb and alone. The first thing that crossed my mind after the call was what I would have to tell my family. But as soon as I thought about it, I knew I couldn't tell them. Not yet. They wouldn't care. Not really. They never had before. And so I decided to keep it to myself. I would deal with this on my own, just like I always had. As the days passed after my diagnosis, I continued with my routine, keeping the weight of the news to myself. I didn't tell my parents. I didn't tell Kate. I didn't even mention it to Mark, though he was the one I was closest to in the family. The thought of their reactions paralyzed me. What would they say? Would they even care? Would they feel guilty for never being there for me when I needed them? The more I thought about it, the less I wanted to face them. I knew their responses would be the same as always, passive indifferent, or in some cases downright dismissive. They wouldn't offer me the support I needed. They never had before. When my father finally called me a week later after I had received my diagnosis, it was nothing short of a formality. "How's everything going, Sarah?" He asked, his tone flat, as if this was just another casual conversation. I could tell he hadn't even thought to ask how I was doing. I was stunned by his lack of concern, but I knew better than to expect more. It had always been this way with him, cold, distant, and far more concerned about his own well-being than mine. I didn't want to tell him the truth. I didn't want him to know about the cancer. Instead, I said, "I'm doing okay, just tired. Work's been a lot, you know." He didn't question it, just mumbled something about how I should take care of myself and let him know if I needed anything. That was it. No further inquiry. No, "I'm here for you." No emotional support. And then, just as quickly, the conversation shifted to my brother's latest business venture. My mother wasn't any better. When I spoke to her a few days later, I tried to bring up the subject, but she quickly steered the conversation back to Kate's new yoga class. "Oh, Sarah, I'm so sorry you're going through this, but Kate is doing so well with her classes. She's really found her passion." I swallowed my frustration. My mother always did this, turned everything back to Kate as if she were the only one who mattered. She couldn't even spare a moment to listen to me, to show any kind of empathy or concern. I realized then that my family had never truly seen me for who I was. They saw me as the one who could handle everything, the strong, dependable one who didn't need anything. But I did need something. I needed them. I needed their support, their love, their care. And yet they were nowhere to be found. When I hung up the phone with her, I felt more alone than I ever had. And then there was Kate. Of course, she had no clue what I was going through. She was too wrapped up in her own world. When I tried to talk to her about my diagnosis, she brushed it off. "You'll be fine, Sarah. It's just a little surgery. Don't make such a big deal out of it." I stared at her in disbelief. I had just learned I had cancer, and she was treating it like a minor inconvenience. I had never expected Kate to be the supportive one, but this was something else entirely. She didn't even try to empathize with me. All she cared about was herself. I realized how toxic the dynamic in our family had become. We were all playing our roles, stuck in these rigid patterns that no one dared to break. I was the responsible one. Kate was the baby, always coddled and protected. Mark was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong. And my parents, they were the ones who set the tone for everything. I had spent my entire life trying to live up to their expectations, trying to be the perfect daughter, the one who didn't ask for help. But now it was clear to me that no one saw the cost of that. No one understood the emotional toll it took to be the strong one all the time, to carry everyone's burdens without ever being allowed to show my own vulnerabilities. I had been holding this family together, keeping everything from falling apart, and yet when I needed them the most, they weren't there for me. That's when I realized how deeply toxic my family had become. They had never cared about my needs or my struggles. They only cared about themselves. I was nothing more than an afterthought in their lives. And that realization was the hardest pill to swallow. But it was also the moment I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't keep living for them. I couldn't keep sacrificing my happiness, my well-being, my health for people who never truly saw me. It was time for me to take back control of my life. It was time to stop being the reliable one, the strong one, the one who never needed anything. If I wanted to survive this, if I wanted to move forward, I had to do it alone. And that scared me. But it also empowered me. For the first time in my life, I was ready to put myself first. I was ready to stop pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. I was ready to demand the care and attention I deserved, even if it meant walking away from my family. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew it was the only way forward. I knew that I had to make a choice. The cancer diagnosis had jolted me into realizing that I couldn't keep ignoring my own needs. For years, I had been the strong one in my family, the one who held everything together. But in that moment when I was facing the reality of my mortality, I understood that I had been sacrificing myself for people who took me for granted. My family had never truly seen me, never truly understood how much I had been giving and how little I had received in return. I had been the emotional caretaker, the one who always showed up when they needed me, but when I needed them, they weren't there. I had spent my entire life caring for everyone else's needs and ignoring my own. But now I had to draw a line. I couldn't do it anymore. The first step in this process was setting boundaries. I had to stop being the person they could rely on without thinking twice. I wasn't going to drop everything for them anymore. If they wanted something from me, they were going to have to ask. They were going to have to acknowledge that I had needs too, but boundaries were only the beginning. I had spent years being the one who was always there, the one who always forgave the one who kept quiet. I realized that for me to heal, I had to stop letting my family walk all over me. I had to stop being the person they leaned on when it was convenient and completely disregarded when it wasn't. I had to make sure they knew the truth, even if it hurt. The next step was retaliation. Smart retaliation. I wasn't going to make a scene or shout at them. I wasn't going to beg for their help or plead for their support. Instead, I would force them to see the impact of their actions. I knew my family well enough to know that they didn't understand the gravity of the situation unless it directly affected them. So I decided to make sure it did. I started by documenting everything. I kept a record of all the times I had helped them, all the times I had sacrificed my own time, energy, and well-being for their benefit. I made a detailed list of the money I had given to Kate, the hours I had spent helping Mark with his business ventures, the emotional labor I had done for my parents. But I didn't keep these records for myself. I kept them to show them, to make them see how much I had given and how little they had ever given back. Then came the hardest part, confronting them. I wasn't sure how they would react, but I knew it was time to stop being silent. I sent a message to the family group chat. It wasn't a cry for help. It wasn't a plea for sympathy. It was a statement of fact. I told them that I had cancer, that I was going to need surgery, and that I wouldn't be able to drive myself home afterward. But the key part of the message was this: I need someone to drive me home. I'm not asking for anything else. I just need someone to help me get home. I didn't ask for their emotional support. I didn't ask them to drop everything for me. I just asked for the bare minimum help getting home after a medical procedure. And I waited. I stared at my phone, watching the message be read by my family. I could almost feel the tension building in my chest as I waited for their response. I knew Kate would probably dismiss it. I knew my father would probably ignore it. But I had to make them see. I had to make them understand what it felt like to need something and be completely disregarded. It wasn't even about the ride anymore. It was about forcing them to confront the reality of our relationship. And just as I expected, the response from Kate came in almost immediately. LOL, you actually thought we would miss Cabo for that. We've been planning this trip for months. I felt a wave of anger rise within me, but I didn't let it show. I just let her words sink in, knowing that they were exactly what I had expected. My mother was next. Don't guilt us, Sarah. This trip has been planned for months. Can't you reschedule your surgery or ask a friend? I stared at the screen, my fingers hovering over the keyboard. I could feel my chest tightening, my blood boiling. But I stayed calm. I didn't respond. Instead, I just turned off my phone and sat there in silence. I needed a moment to breathe, to process the utter lack of care in their responses. They hadn't even considered that I might be going through something difficult. They hadn't even acknowledged the gravity of what I was dealing with. They just brushed me aside as always. It was then that I realized how deep the roots of this toxicity ran. My family was not just indifferent to me. They were actively making it clear that I wasn't worth their time, their attention, or their empathy. They were so wrapped up in their own lives that they couldn't even spare a moment to think about the pain I was going through. But it was fine. I didn't need them. I would take care of myself. I would find a way to get through this with or without them. I would show them that I didn't need their support to survive. But as I sat there, the weight of it all crashed down on me. I was about to go through one of the most difficult experiences of my life, and the people I had spent my entire life trying to please weren't even going to be there for me. I couldn't keep pretending that this was normal. I couldn't keep acting like everything was okay when it wasn't. I had to make a change. And I had to start by showing them that I wasn't going to be their doormat anymore. The more I thought about my family's response to my situation, the more disgusted I became. They were never going to change if I continued to stay silent, if I kept letting them off the hook. I had been the dependable one for years, always stepping up, always cleaning up after them, always hiding my pain for the sake of family harmony. But now, something inside me had snapped. This was no longer just about my illness. This was about my dignity, about demanding respect, about standing up for myself after a lifetime of being disregarded. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. I had been overlooked for far too long, and now it was time for everyone to see the truth. It was time for my family to face the consequences of their indifference. I wasn't going to just ask for help. I was going to force them to recognize how much I had been giving without ever receiving anything in return. I started by documenting everything. Every time I had helped my parents, every time I had sacrificed my own well-being for their benefit, I wrote it down. I kept a record of every dollar I had lent to Kate, every favor I had done for Mark, every hour I had spent taking care of my father when he was sick. And then I did something that felt incredibly liberating. I shared it all. I sent a message to the family group chat detailing everything I had done for them over the years. I listed all the times I had helped, all the sacrifices I had made, and all the times I had put my own needs aside for their benefit. I included the $15,000 I had lent Kate, the countless hours I had spent helping Mark with his business, and the emotional labor I had put into holding the family together. I didn't just write it for me. I wrote it so they could see it. I wrote it to make them understand how much I had been doing and how little they had ever given in return. I wanted them to feel the weight of their neglect. I wanted them to see the person they had been ignoring for so long. When I hit send, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. For the first time in my life, I had taken control. I wasn't asking for sympathy or pity. I was simply stating the facts. I was forcing them to confront the truth about our family dynamic. And I knew that once they saw it, they wouldn't be able to ignore it. The response was immediate. Kate, of course, was the first to reply. "What's the point of all this?" "Sarah, why are you trying to make us feel guilty? You always act like you have it all together." Her message was dripping with condescension, as if I were the one in the wrong for simply telling the truth. "My mother wasn't much better. I didn't realize you were keeping track of everything you've done for us, Sarah," she said. "But this isn't about keeping score. We're family. We help each other." Her words were so hollow, so meaningless, I almost laughed. She didn't get it. She still didn't see what I was trying to say. My father's response came next. It was short and blunt. "You should have just asked for help, Sarah. This isn't the way to go about things. No apology. No recognition of the years I had spent helping them. Just an accusation that I should have asked for help." But that was the point, wasn't it? I had asked for help, and they had ignored me. I didn't need to ask anymore. I had made my point. The twist came when Mark responded. "You've always been the responsible one, Sarah. I didn't realize how much you were carrying all this time." That was the first time anyone in my family had acknowledged the emotional weight I had been carrying. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was the first crack in the facade that had held our family together for so long. The more I thought about it, the more I realized that exposing the truth wasn't about making them feel guilty. It was about finally being seen, being heard. For so long, I had been invisible in my own family. But now I was forcing them to face the consequences of their neglect. The real retaliation wasn't about making them feel bad for their behavior. It was about taking back control of my life. I wasn't going to let them use me anymore. I wasn't going to let them continue to walk all over me. I was going to demand respect, demand acknowledgement, and demand change. The most important part of my retaliation wasn't the message I sent. It was the realization that I no longer needed their approval. I had spent my whole life trying to please them, trying to earn their love and support. But now, I saw that I didn't need them to validate my existence. I was strong enough on my own. I had always been strong enough, and that was something they couldn't take away from me. The days following the message were tense. My family didn't know how to react. They didn't know how to handle the truth I had exposed. But as the days passed, I started to feel lighter. The weight of keeping everything bottled up had been unbearable, and now I had let it out. The world felt different somehow. I wasn't burdened by the need to please anyone anymore. I had taken the first step toward freeing myself from the toxic grip my family had on me. I didn't know where this journey would take me, but for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was finally in control of my own life. It was a few days after I sent that message detailing everything I had done for the family when the reality of what I had done began to sink in. My family's responses had been a mix of denial and defensiveness, but there was also an undertone of discomfort. I could sense that they were grappling with the truth I had exposed, the truth they had been able to ignore for so long. Kate, in her usual fashion, continued to minimize everything. "You're overreacting, Sarah. This isn't a big deal. Just let it go," she texted. Her words, as usual, were dismissive, but what surprised me was my father's silence. Normally, he would have responded right away, either in anger or with a calm down type of response. But this time he didn't. It was as if he couldn't find the words. That made me realize how deeply my message had affected him. Maybe, just maybe, he was beginning to see me in a different light. The following week, I had my surgery. The procedure was scheduled for the 15th, just as I had planned, and as I lay in the hospital bed afterward, the reality of it all began to feel surreal. I was recovering from cancer surgery, something I never thought I would go through. My body ached, my throat felt raw, but there was something else too, an odd sense of relief. I had finally spoken my truth. I had finally stood up for myself. And now, I had to deal with the consequences. The consequences weren't immediate, but they were palpable. I received a text from Mark, of all people, a few days after my surgery. "I didn't realize how much you had been carrying, Sarah," he said. "We've been blind to it. I'm sorry." I hadn't expected an apology from him. I hadn't expected anything from anyone. But that small acknowledgement, that tiny admission, was a start. My father finally called me. His voice was different this time. There was no coldness, no judgment. He seemed softer. "Sarah, I've been thinking a lot about what you said," he started. "I realize now that I've taken you for granted. You've always been the one to hold it all together, and I never saw how much it cost you." That was the first time in my life I had ever heard my father admit he was wrong. It was a small moment, but it meant more than I could ever put into words. It didn't erase everything that had happened, but it was a crack in the wall that had kept us from truly connecting for all these years. My mother, of course, had her own way of handling it. She didn't say much at first, but I could feel her guilt seeping through in the way she spoke. "I didn't know you felt this way, Sarah," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I'm sorry." And then came Kate. She texted me a few days after my surgery, her tone softer than usual. "I'm sorry for being so selfish, Sarah. I didn't realize how much you were giving, and I never appreciated it. I'll do better. I promise." I didn't know what to say. I had spent so many years holding on to the hope that my family would change, that they would finally see me, and now that it was happening, I didn't know how to process it. But deep down, I knew that this wasn't about forgiving them right away. This was about setting boundaries and understanding that I had a right to stand up for myself, even if it meant confronting the people I loved most. I wasn't sure if things would truly change. I wasn't sure if I could trust my family to treat me better in the long run. But I knew this: I had finally found my voice, and I wasn't going to lose it again. Over the next few weeks, I focused on my recovery, taking it one day at a time. I didn't push my family too hard. I let them come to me in their own time, on their own terms. But I wasn't going to forget what had happened. I wasn't going to let them go back to treating me like I was invisible. I had learned that sometimes the only way to get through to people is to show them the consequences of their actions. I had made them see what they had been doing to me for years. I had forced them to acknowledge the weight of my sacrifices, the toll it had taken on me. And now they had to live with it. They had to live with the fact that they had hurt me and that they couldn't undo the damage. It wasn't a perfect solution, and it wasn't going to fix everything overnight. But it was a start. It was a start toward healing, toward understanding, and toward finding a new way to relate to each other as a family. The biggest consequence wasn't just the words I had said or the records I had kept, it was the shift in power. For the first time in my life, I was no longer the one who was always there, always giving, always sacrificing. I had taken back control. And that, more than anything else, was the most powerful thing I could do. As the weeks passed and I began to heal from my surgery, I couldn't help but reflect on everything that had transpired. The surgery itself had been a turning point, both physically and emotionally. As my body slowly recovered, I realized how much I had been carrying for years. The burden of keeping up with my family's expectations, the constant emotional labor of being the dependable one, had worn me down. But it wasn't just the physical scars that needed healing. It was the emotional wounds, the years of feeling overlooked and unappreciated that needed attention. For the first time in my life, I was forced to confront the fact that I had been sacrificing too much for people who never truly saw me. And in the wake of that realization, I had made a choice to take back control. I decided to stop pretending. I decided to stop living for them and start living for myself. It wasn't easy. There were days when I felt the weight of the past pressing down on me, and I had to fight the urge to fall back into old habits of people-pleasing and overcompensating for others. But every day I reminded myself that I had a right to put myself first. I had a right to my own happiness, my own peace of mind. It wasn't a choice that came easily. After all, I had spent my entire life playing the role of the responsible one, the one who always made sure everyone else was okay. But now, I was learning to put my own needs above theirs, and that felt incredibly liberating. Slowly but surely, I began to carve out a life for myself that wasn't dictated by my family's expectations. I pursued the things that mattered to me, the things that had been put on hold for so long. I started focusing on my freelance business again, taking on projects that sparked my creativity and making time for hobbies and passions that I had long neglected. It felt strange at first, like I was stepping into an entirely new world, but the more I embraced it, the more I realized that this was who I was meant to be. A person who didn't apologize for wanting to live for herself. The family dynamic didn't change overnight. There were still moments of tension, still moments where I felt the familiar pull to revert to old patterns of behavior. But I held firm. I set boundaries, and I stuck to them. I didn't let my parents' guilt trips or Kate's manipulations sway me anymore. I knew my worth, and I wasn't going to let anyone make me feel small again. One day, I decided to take a step further in my journey toward healing. I reached out to a therapist. It was something I had been considering for a long time, but I had always felt like I didn't need it, that I could handle everything on my own. But I was wrong. I needed help. I needed to talk to someone who could help me untangle the mess of emotions that had built up over the years. It wasn't easy to open up about everything I had been through, but as I sat in that therapist's office and began to unpack the layers of pain, guilt, and anger, I realized how much I had been holding in, and how much I still had to let go. Therapy became an essential part of my healing process. It gave me a safe space to explore my feelings and to learn how to set healthier boundaries, not just with my family, but with everyone in my life. For the first time in years, I felt like I was taking care of myself in a way that was meaningful. I wasn't just surviving. I was finally starting to live. As for my family, things were still complicated. My father had apologized, but there was still a part of me that couldn't fully forgive him. My mother, too, had expressed regret, but I knew that the changes would have to come from within her, not just from a few words of apology. And Kate, well, Kate had begun to show a glimmer of change, but it was hard to tell if it would last. Her text had been a start, but actions, not words, were what truly mattered. I couldn't expect everything to be fixed overnight. But what mattered now was that I had made the decision to stop living for them. I had made the decision to take my life back, and that, in itself, was a victory. Looking back, I realized that my battle wasn't just against my family, it was against the version of myself that had allowed them to treat me this way for so long. It was a battle against the person who had believed that love meant sacrifice, that worth meant giving everything, even when it meant losing yourself in the process. But now I understood that true love, true self-worth came from within. It came from setting boundaries, from knowing your limits, from realizing that you can't pour from an empty cup. I wasn't going to let my family or anyone else take from me anymore. The journey was far from over, but I was no longer afraid. I had faced the worst, and I had survived. I had survived the cancer, the emotional trauma, and the toxic family dynamics. And now I was learning to live, to thrive. It wasn't just about healing physically, it was about healing emotionally, about reclaiming my life and my happiness. And with each passing day, I grew stronger, more confident in my own worth. It wasn't easy, but nothing worth having ever is. Months passed, and I continued to rebuild my life. My body was healing from the surgery, but the emotional scars were much deeper, much harder to mend. There were days when the weight of it all, my family's neglect, my cancer diagnosis, the emotional toll felt unbearable. But I had learned not to push my feelings down. I had learned to feel everything and not be afraid of it. I had learned to say no, to put myself first, and to demand the respect that I had never gotten before. And while I had started to carve out a new life for myself, I knew that there was still one final hurdle I needed to face my family. They hadn't changed overnight, and I hadn't expected them to. My father, while he had apologized, still showed signs of the old coldness. My mother was still focused on Kate, as she always had been, and Kate. Well, Kate had made some attempts to improve, but her actions still didn't match her words. I realized that if I truly wanted to move forward and heal, I needed to confront them to set final, unbreakable boundaries. It wasn't enough to just be distant or passive. I needed to stand my ground to let them know exactly how I felt and what I needed from them, if anything at all. I decided that the best way to do this was in person. I couldn't do it over a phone call or text message. I needed to see their faces, to look into their eyes and see if they understood the weight of what they had done. I called a family meeting. I told them that it was important, that it wasn't negotiable. And when the day came, I wasn't sure what to expect. The tension in the air was palpable as my father, mother, and Kate walked into my apartment. There was an awkward silence as we sat down, each of us unsure of how to begin. I knew they were probably thinking about the cancer, about the surgeries, about what had happened. But for me, it wasn't just about the medical side of things anymore. It was about all the years I had spent feeling invisible, unimportant, and unappreciated. It was about all the times I had sacrificed my own happiness for the sake of keeping the peace. It was about the realization that I had been giving so much, yet never receiving what I needed in return. I looked at them, taking a deep breath. I had to say this. I had to finally let them know the truth. I want to start by saying that I appreciate the fact that you're here. I began, my voice steady, though my heart was racing. But the truth is, for most of my life, I've felt like I didn't matter. Like my needs were secondary to everyone else's. My father looked at me, his face unreadable. My mother's eyes were downcast, and Kate seemed to shift uncomfortably in her chair. I could feel the emotions rising within me, but I pushed them back. I needed to be strong now, stronger than I had ever been. I've been the one who always helped, always showed up when things went wrong. I've been the one who carried the burden of this family, and it's been exhausting. I've done things for all of you without question, without hesitation, and I've never once asked for anything in return. There was a long pause. I could feel my words hanging in the air, the weight of them pressing down on all of us. And now, when I need help, when I need support, all I get is indifference. All I get is dismissal. I've been ignored. I've been taken for granted. And I'm done with that. My father shifted uncomfortably in his seat. My mother wiped her eyes, and Kate looked away, her face red. I could see it now, the guilt. The recognition that they had failed me. But I wasn't going to make it easy for them. I've spent my whole life trying to make you proud, trying to keep the peace, trying to be the perfect daughter. But I'm done. I'm done trying to be the person you think I should be. I'm done being the one who sacrifices everything and gets nothing in return. I could feel my hands shaking as I continued, but I didn't stop. I'm not asking for your approval anymore. I'm not asking for your support anymore. I'm asking for respect. I'm asking for acknowledgement of everything I've done, and I'm asking for you to understand that I have needs too. I'm not just here to serve you. I am my own person, and I deserve better than this. There was a long silence after I finished speaking. It felt like the air was thick with tension, but it also felt strangely liberating. For the first time, I had said what I needed to say, and I didn't feel guilty about it. I wasn't apologizing for wanting respect, for wanting love. I wasn't apologizing for wanting to be seen. My father spoke first, his voice softer than usual. I. I didn't realize you felt this way, Sarah, he said quietly. I've always been proud of you, but I guess I've never really shown it. I've taken you for granted, and I'm sorry for that. It wasn't the apology I had hoped for, but it was a start. My mother, too, spoke up, her voice trembling. I'm sorry, Sarah. I never saw how much you were giving. I didn't realize how much you were hurting. Kate finally was the last to speak. I didn't know, she said softly. I never realized how much you've done for all of us. I'm sorry. I could see that they were all genuinely remorseful, but I wasn't ready to forgive them yet. Not completely. This conversation wasn't about forgiveness. It was about setting boundaries and making it clear that I would no longer tolerate being taken for granted. I appreciate your apologies, I said firmly, but this isn't something that can be fixed overnight. It's going to take time for me to rebuild trust with all of you, and I need you to understand that my boundaries are non-negotiable. The conversation ended on that note with a heavy but necessary understanding between us. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't a magical fix, but it was the beginning of a new chapter. I wasn't sure where this would take us, but I was confident in one thing: I had finally taken control of my life.